The woman sitting in the third row of my wedding was crying. But not because she was happy. I remember the exact shade of her waterproof mascara staining her cheeks 10 years ago. This morning, my husband David introduced her as Elena, his new office assistant. He looked me dead in the eyes and swore they'd never met. My skin went cold because I don't forget a face. I have a photographic memory. It's a gift that's about to become a death sentence. While I was sleeping last night, someone moved my wedding ring from my left hand to my right. Now, David is standing outside our bedroom door with a glass of water and the vitamins he's forced me to take for years. He says I'm having another episode. He says if I don't sign the separation papers by midnight, he's having me committed. I just found a contract showing he hired Elena 2 years before we even said I do. I haven't been a wife. I've been a project. Let me take you back to where this began. The smell of burnt rosemary clung to the kitchen air while the evening news hummed on the countertop tablet. Sarah Miller paused, her thumb hovering over a cooling ceramic mug. On the screen, a woman named Catherine Vance wept into a microphone, her grief broadcasted in high-definition pixels. 10 years of memory surged. Sarah saw the same trembling chin and hollowed eyes, not in black funeral attire, but in the blurred background of her own wedding reception. The stranger who had stood near the peonies, sobbing without an invitation. David reached for the salt shaker, his wedding band clicking against the glass. He didn't glance up from his steak. "David, watch this." Sarah's voice was brittle as she slid the tablet across the granite. The woman from the park shooting. She was there, at the vineyard, 10 years ago. David chewed slowly, his gaze flickering toward the screen for a heartbeat. He let out a dry, dismissive grunt. "You're seeing ghosts in every shadow, Sarah. People have faces. They repeat." She stood by the arbor for 20 minutes. I remember the lace on her sleeves. "It's a coincidence. You're exhausted." He sawed through a piece of meat, the screech of his knife against the porcelain setting Sarah's teeth on edge. Paranoia doesn't suit the evening. He returned to his meal, leaving Sarah alone with the ghost on the screen. The weight of his dismissal felt like a physical pressure, a familiar tightening in her chest. She retreated to her office, the floorboards groaning under her slippers. The external drive whirred to life, a mechanical heartbeat in the quiet room. She scrolled through folders labeled June 2014, clicking until a high-resolution candid blossomed across the monitor. There, amidst the champagne flutes and laughter, Catherine Vance stood. She wasn't a guest. She was a witness. Sarah's fingers traced the sharp edge of the desk as the truth crystallized in the blue light. The realization was a cold stone in her stomach. Sarah began to narrate her findings into her small digital recorder, her voice a low, rhythmic whisper. Glass, silicon, light. The image at 400% magnification shows the woman in the background. 3 details: the silver locket, the tear on the left cheek, the hand gripping the arbor. It's her. This was Sarah's sanctuary, the rule of 3. It was the only way she knew how to process the chaos of a world that refused to stay in its blueprints. She spent the next hour cross-referencing the image with the news footage. The woman on the screen, now identified as Catherine Vance, was the same woman from the wedding. But there was a new layer to the mystery. Catherine had just been announced as the new senior administrative lead at David's investment firm. Sarah felt the air in the room grow thin. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a convergence. The next morning, Jennifer Thompson arrived, her arms full of sunflowers and a box of artisan donuts. Jennifer was the kind of friend who apologized to the coffee table when she bumped into it, her soft face always etched with a layer of sympathetic worry. "I'm so sorry I'm late, Sarah. The traffic on I-94 was just... It was a nightmare," Jennifer said, her voice fluttering like a trapped bird. She caught sight of Sarah's face and stopped. "Oh no, you have that look. The I've been up all night staring at blueprints look." Sarah pulled Jennifer into the office, the smell of the sunflowers clashing with the stale, electric scent of the computer fans. "Jennifer, look at this. Catherine Vance. She's at my wedding 10 years ago, and now she's David's new assistant." Jennifer leaned in, squinting at the screen. She nodded frantically, a habit of hers to show she was listening. "She looks sad. But Sarah, honey, maybe she was just a +1 or a server. People move in the same circles. David's firm is huge. She wasn't on the guest list. I memorized the list, Jennifer. 142 names. She wasn't one of them." Sarah clicked her recorder. "Paper, ink, memory. The list is absolute." Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to a deep, furrowed concern. "Sarah, you know what the doctor said last year? About the stress, about the patterns you see when things get hard. David called me this morning. He's worried you're spiraling again." The betrayal stung more than the SUV that would nearly kill her an hour later. Sarah realized David was already building a fence around her, using Jennifer as the first post. Subverted, Sarah decided to prove her sanity by gathering undeniable physical evidence. She knew that if she could present a clear, logical chain of custody for the information, even David couldn't argue. Her father had always told her that the third detail is the truth, and she intended to find it. She spent the afternoon meticulously printing the wedding photos and the news transcripts, placing them in a professional leather portfolio. This was the smart move, turning her paranoia into a documented architectural case. She felt a surge of confidence. The data was on her side. As she drove toward the local library to use their high-resolution scanner, she felt a sense of relief. She had the photos. She had the timeline. She was acting like the professional architect she was. When she pulled into the quiet, tree-lined parking lot, she saw a familiar car, Jennifer's Volvo. Jennifer was standing there, waiting with a warm, encouraging smile. "I thought about what you said," Jennifer called out. "Let's scan them together. I'll help you organize the files so David can see you're thinking clearly." Sarah felt the tension drain from her shoulders. This was a victory. She wasn't alone, but as Sarah reached into the back seat for her portfolio, she noticed something odd. Jennifer wasn't moving toward the library. She was looking past Sarah, toward the entrance of the parking lot. Her smile hadn't changed, but her eyes were fixed on something else. A dark SUV pulled in, blocking the exit. Sarah's heart gave a sudden, violent thud against her ribs. Jennifer didn't look at the SUV. She looked at Sarah and said, "David is just so worried, Sarah. He said if you came here, it meant you were really sick. He told me to call him the second you arrived." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach. The help wasn't help at all. It was a lure. Jennifer hadn't come to support her. She had come to verify her instability for David. Sarah lunged for the driver's seat, but the SUV accelerated. It didn't stop. It veered toward her, the roar of the engine drowning out her scream. She dove into the damp mulch of the library's landscaping just as the heavy metal frame of the vehicle smashed into her open car door with a sickening crunch. The SUV didn't linger. It sped away, leaving the smell of burnt rubber and the sight of her mangled door hanging by a single hinge. Sarah lay in the dirt, her portfolio scattered, realizing that her smart move had just provided David with the exact evidence he needed. A scene of a manic Sarah involved in a self-inflicted car accident. Shaken and covered in grit, Sarah didn't go home. She couldn't. Home was where the locks were on the outside. Instead, she waited until the adrenaline turned into a cold, sharp clarity. She remembered David's gym bag. He always kept it in the trunk of his car, but he'd brought it into the bedroom this morning. She crept back into the house through the mudroom, her movements silent, practiced. The house smelled of expensive candles and the floor wax David insisted on, scents that felt like a mask. She found the bag in the corner of the master suite. Her fingers fumbled through the mesh pockets, past the smelling salts and the grip tape. There, tucked into a hidden seam, was a heavy brass key with a circular head. It bore no markings, only a small, hand-etched number. 402. Brass, cold, hidden, she whispered into her recorder, her heart hammering. The key exists. The secret has a physical weight. The next morning, the house felt like a tomb. David was gone before dawn, leaving a note about a crisis at the office and a reminder to take her vitamins. Sarah ignored the pills. Instead, she went to his home office. The room was a shrine to his success. Mahogany, leather, and the faint scent of his cologne. Hacking into his computer wasn't a matter of code. It was a matter of knowing the man. David was a creature of ego. His password was the date of his first $1 million closing. The system clicked open, the screen glowing with a predatory light. Sarah bypassed the surface folders, looking for the third detail. She found it buried in a folder labeled Property Maintenance. It was a contract, a secret employment agreement for Catherine Vance, signed and dated 2 years before Sarah and David had even met. Catherine wasn't an assistant. She wasn't a stranger. According to the document, she was a special consultant for asset protection. Sarah stared at the digital signature. The ink was virtual, but the betrayal was visceral. David had put Catherine at their wedding. He had put her in the background of their life for a decade, a silent sentry watching the asset. Sarah herself. The gaslighting began in earnest that evening. David returned home with a bouquet of lilies. Flowers for a funeral, Sarah thought. He spent the evening on the phone with Jennifer, his voice a low, performative thrum of concern that Sarah could hear through the vents. "She's just not herself, Jennifer," David said, his voice dripping with honeyed poison. "The accident at the library. The police said she just drove into a pole. She's claiming someone chased her. It's the paranoia. It's getting worse." Sarah sat in the dark of her office, listening to him build the cage. She decided to go to the storage facility. She needed to know what was in Unit 402. The facility was a labyrinth of galvanized steel and humming fluorescent lights. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and old dust. Sarah found the unit. Her hand trembled as she slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. She swung the door open, expecting crates of documents, or perhaps the black SUV. The unit was empty, nothing but bare concrete and a single, flickering light bulb. Sarah stepped inside, her breath hitching. Then she saw it. A small red eye nestled in the corner of the ceiling. A motion sensor. It wasn't a storage unit. It was a trap. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from David. "Why are you at the storage place, honey? I thought you were resting." He was watching her in real time. The facility wasn't a place for secrets. It was a place for surveillance. Sarah fled. She drove aimlessly for an hour, her mind racing through architectural tolerances. The house was no longer a home, it was a structure of confinement. When she finally returned, she pretended to sleep, but her eyes were wide in the darkness. She felt David enter the room. He didn't touch her. He stood at the foot of the bed, the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of his knuckles, thumb, index, pinky, filling the silence. The next morning, her wedding ring was on her right hand. She knew she hadn't moved it. The home security system log showed it had been disarmed at 3 a.m., but the cameras showed nothing but empty hallways. David was editing the reality of her physical world. Steel, glass, shadow. Sarah whispered into her recorder under the covers. The walls are moving. The foundation is rot. She returned to the storage facility one last time, driven by a desperate hunch. She hadn't looked at the floor. In the center of the empty unit, there was a faint outline in the dust, the shape of a large crate. She knelt, her fingers brushing the cold concrete. She found a scrap of paper, a shipping manifest from a company called Vance and Associates. A shadow fell over the doorway. Sarah lunged to her feet. A man stood there, a mountain of a man with scarred knuckles and a buzzed haircut. Robert Harris. He didn't speak. He just looked at the ceiling, his lips moving in a silent, rhythmic count. 21, 22, 23. Who are you? Sarah demanded, her voice echoing off the metal walls. Harris didn't answer. He stepped into the unit, his presence an immovable force. He wore a mask, a simple black cloth, but his eyes were cold and professional. He lunged. The struggle was a blur of heavy breathing and the screech of boots on concrete. Sarah wasn't a fighter, but she was an architect. She knew about leverage. She swung her heavy metal T-square, the sharp edge catching Harris across the forearm. He didn't flinch, but the momentary distraction gave her enough space to bolt. She sprinted through the labyrinth, the high-pitched whine of the security system vibrating in her skull, and burst out into the rain. She didn't go to the police. Who would believe the unstable woman who had just assaulted a security guard at a facility she wasn't supposed to be at? Instead, she went to her office and pulled out the original blueprints of their house. She had designed the renovations 3 years ago. But as she looked at the final as-built plans, she saw the discrepancies. The ventilation ducts were wider than she'd specified. The wiring for the security system had been rerouted through a secondary hub she hadn't authorized. She remembered the magazines. Catherine, had left them in the mailbox. Modern Sanctuary. The Hidden Home. Sarah had been inspired by them, but now she saw the truth. Every innovation she'd made had been a suggestion planted by Catherine. Her own home was a curated psychological cage, designed by her husband and his consultant to keep her monitored and manageable. Sarah knew she had to end it. She feigned a complete mental collapse the next morning. She wept. She threw a vase. She begged David for help. "I can't do this anymore, David," she sobbed, her face buried in her hands. "I need to get away." "The cabin. Let's go to the cabin in Wisconsin. Just us, please." David's smile was a masterpiece of predatory comfort. "Of course, honey. That's a wonderful idea. A reset. Just what we need." The drive to the Wisconsin woods was a journey into hostility. The trees reached out like claws, and the smell of wet, rotting leaves filled the car. They arrived at the cabin, a lonely structure huddled against a cliffside. As soon as the door clicked shut, the mask fell. David didn't offer her tea. He didn't offer her a hug. He sat at the dusty dining table and slid a stack of papers toward her. "Legal separation, Sarah. And a voluntary commitment form for the Silver Oaks Institute, David said, his voice flat and devoid of the soft sell. You sign these by midnight, or I call the sheriff and have you taken in by force. You're a danger to yourself, Sarah. Everyone knows it. Jennifer, the neighbors, the police. Sarah looked at the papers. You want the trust fund? I've earned it, David replied, cracking his knuckles. Pop, pop, pop. 10 years of playing the doting husband to a woman who narrates her life like a machine. I'm done, Sarah. The milestone passes at midnight. Sign the papers, and you go to a nice, quiet place where you can count tiles all day. Subverted. Sarah saw her opening when David went out to the porch to take a call. His briefcase sat on the chair, the latch slightly askew. She knew this was her chance. She had to find something, anything, to use as leverage. She opened the case, her heart racing. Inside, beneath a layer of mundane business files, she found it, a leather-bound ledger. She flipped through the pages. It was a masterpiece of fraud. Thousands of entries detailing illegal offshore accounts, shell companies, and money laundering schemes tied to David's firm. This was it. This was the third detail. With this ledger, she didn't just have a divorce case. She had the power to put David in federal prison for the rest of his life. She felt a surge of triumph so strong it made her dizzy. She had outsmarted him. She had the data. She tucked the ledger under her sweater and moved back to the sofa, her mind already calculating the path to the car. She would wait until he was asleep, then drive to the nearest federal building. The relief was overwhelming. She had won. But as she sat there, she heard a sound from the porch. David wasn't talking on the phone. He was laughing. A second voice joined him, a woman's voice, Catherine Vance. The door opened, and Catherine stepped inside, her rigid posture and mismatched socks a jarring contrast to the rustic cabin. She wasn't surprised to see Sarah. She looked directly at Sarah's sweater, where the ledger created a sharp, rectangular bulge. Did you find what you were looking for, Sarah? Catherine asked, her voice cold. The ledger is a nice touch, isn't it? David and I spent quite a lot of time fabricating it. Sarah froze. Fabricating it? It's all fake, Sarah, David said, stepping in behind Catherine. The accounts, the numbers, the signatures. It's a manic manifestation of your obsession with my firm. We've already sent a digital copy to your doctor as evidence of your deteriorating state. You didn't find leverage? You found the final nail in your coffin. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. The unlocked briefcase, the secret ledger, it was all a setup. She had fallen for the one thing she thought she was immune to, a false trail of data. Now, she wasn't just a woman with a difficult husband. She was a woman caught stealing and hallucinating financial crimes. The situation escalated into violence within minutes. Catherine lunged for the ledger, her movements precise and military. Sarah scrambled back into the kitchen, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. "Stay back!" Sarah screamed. Catherine didn't stop. She moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency. They struggled over the kitchen island, the smell of old wood smoke and ash thick in the air. Sarah swung the skillet, the heavy iron connecting with Catherine's shoulder with a sickening thud. Catherine grunted but didn't fall. Sarah used the moment to bolt for the stairs. She reached the master bedroom and slammed the door, shoving a heavy oak dresser in front of it. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Sarah!" David's voice came from the other side of the door, calm and terrifyingly reasonable. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." She heard a metallic scrape, a screwdriver. David wasn't going to break the door down. He was going to unscrew the hinges. He was dismantling her last barrier with the same methodical patience he'd used to dismantle her life. Sarah scanned the room, her photographic memory searching for an escape. She saw a loose floorboard near the closet. She pried it up, hoping for a weapon. Instead, she found a small floor safe. Inside was a single document, a post-nuptial agreement. She scanned the pages. It was a complete forfeiture of all assets if she was hospitalized for psychiatric reasons. And there, at the bottom, was her signature. It was a perfect forgery, executed with a precision that made her stomach turn. David hadn't just been gaslighting her. He'd been stealing her legal identity for years. She found her bottle of daily vitamins on the nightstand. She cracked one open. Instead of the white powder of her usual supplement, the capsule contained a fine, crystalline blue dust. Hallucinogens. He'd been drugging her for years, ensuring her episodes were chemically induced. The first hinge pin hit the floor with a soft clink. Sarah knew she had only minutes. She clicked her recorder. Crawl space, ventilation, the 1994 layout. She remembered the cabin's design. It was a standard eagle's nest model from the 90s. There was a narrow maintenance crawl space behind the closet that led directly to the basement. She squeezed into the dark, cramped space, the smell of old insulation and mouse droppings filling her nose. She moved by touch, her fingers tracing the cold metal of the ducts. She reached the basement and found the smart home hub, the brain of the cabin. Copper, plastic, current, she whispered. She didn't just cut the power. She sabotaged the grid, creating a feedback loop that would lock every electronic door and shutter in the house while plunging it into total darkness. The house groaned as the shutters slammed shut. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah navigated the basement in the dark, her memory of the layout perfect. She found the bulkhead door and emerged into the freezing Wisconsin rain. She ran toward the highway, her lungs burning, her feet slipping on the wet leaves. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. She flagged the car down, a frantic, mud-covered specter. The driver was an elderly man, his face etched with concern. "My God, lady, what happened?" Sarah didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked at him and said, "I need to make a call. I have a set of numbers I need to recite." Weeks later, the air in the high-rise office in downtown Chicago was sterile and smelled of expensive coffee. Sarah sat across from 2 IRS investigators and a team of lawyers. "The ledger was fake," Sarah explained, her voice steady. "But the account numbers I memorized from David's actual computer, the ones hidden in the property maintenance folder, those are very real." She had used the fake ledger as a distraction, but her photographic memory had captured the true data during her brief hack of his computer. She delivered the digital evidence of a decade-long money laundering scheme, a wife farm where David and his sister Catherine had targeted wealthy women, drugged them into instability, and seized their trust funds. The final twist was the DNA. Catherine wasn't a consultant. She was David's biological half-sister. They were a team, a predatory unit that had perfected the art of the long con. The story ended not in a courtroom, but on a quiet beach in Hawaii. Sarah sat on the sand, the rhythmic, thunderous crashing of the surf a cleansing sound. She watched the news report on her tablet, the sight of David and Catherine being led away in handcuffs, their faces pale and stripped of their masks. Sarah turned the screen off. She picked up a sketchbook and a charcoal pencil. She didn't draw a fortress. She didn't draw a cage. She began to sketch a house with wide-open windows, a structure defined not by its security, but by its light. Cedar, salt, horizon, she whispered. But she didn't click the recorder. She didn't need to. For the first time in 10 years, the third detail wasn't a threat. It was the truth. And the truth was that she was finally free.